Divorce court isn't supposed to feel like a stage, but that day, it did. James sat across from me, grinning like he'd just sealed a business deal instead of ending an 8-year marriage. That smirk, God, I can still see it, spread across his face as he slid the signed documents toward the judge. To him, I was the naive small-town wife who'd finally accepted her place, quiet, agreeable, dispensable. What he didn't realize was that while he spent late nights tangled in office affairs, I was silently rewriting the narrative he thought he'd controlled. Let me take you back, before courtrooms, betrayals, and revelations. I'm Alexandra Grant. I'm 34, born and raised in Winfield, Indiana, where life is simple, people are kind, and ambition is often whispered rather than shouted. I was never content with quiet dreams. My sights were set on Chicago, its skyscrapers, its chaos, its opportunity. I enrolled in a design program, slept in a shoebox apartment above a bakery, and worked part-time jobs to afford art supplies. While classmates leaned on family trust funds, I taught myself how to stretch every dollar and still build something beautiful. My parents, modest and pragmatic, always said, don't chase fast money. Chase meaning. I never forgot that. Even when I met James Shannon. He entered my world like a storm dressed in tailored Armani. Our paths crossed at a fundraiser, he, the polished financier with a surname that echoed across real estate and private equity circles. Me, the volunteer graphic artist responsible for the event's branding. You don't seem like the gala type, he'd said, a gleam of condescension barely hidden beneath the flirtation. But I was young, swept up in the way he made me feel seen. At least in that moment, the whirlwind began. Limousines. Rooftop dinners. Helicopter rides to the Hamptons. He painted over my humble background with strokes of extravagance I'd only seen in magazines. I told myself he saw something in me others didn't. I mistook attention for respect. James was the kind of man who never asked about student loans because he never had to consider them. Wealth followed him like a shadow. To his credit, he never hid his pedigree. But what I didn't realize was how deeply he measured people by their proximity to privilege. My career as a junior designer thrilled me. I loved watching concepts become campaigns, logos breathe life into brands. James, however, saw my job as a quirky hobby. You don't have to work, love, he'd say while swirling scotch in a crystal tumbler. Why tire yourself for pocket change? What he didn't understand was that designing gave me a sense of control, one of the few things I owned outright in our gilded life. 6 months in, he proposed with a ring so large it felt more ornamental than intimate. The setting, a rooftop restaurant overlooking the river. Diners clapped. Strangers filmed. Everything was curated, performative. Still, I said yes. Not because I didn't see the warning signs, but because I believed I could grow into that world. The wedding was elegant, restrained, my insistence. James' family wanted grandeur, media coverage, something that would land in society columns. I pushed back. It's not a brand launch, I argued. It's a marriage. That clash foreshadowed many others. His mother's icy remark, a simple ceremony for a simple girl, echoed long after the vows. We settled into his penthouse overlooking downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished marble everything, furniture chosen by decorators who'd never met us. It looked like a showroom, not a home. I tried to infuse warmth, photos, plants, splashes of color. Each effort was met with passive resistance. Minimalism shows class, he'd say, removing the hand-knit throw my aunt had gifted us. Within months, the sheen faded. Criticisms replaced compliments. My friends became immature, my hobbies unproductive, my thoughts emotional. I began walking on eggshells, constantly calibrating my words, my outfits, my tone. My work? Cute. My opinions? Well-intentioned, but uninformed. The social circles I was expected to orbit around were filled with women who had signature scents and personal stylists. They wore smiles like masks, perfected the art of the subtle snub. I was tolerated, not embraced. At a dinner party, I overheard one of them say, "She's James' experiment with the working class." I laughed it off publicly. Privately, I cried in the bathroom at James' advice. Join them. Hire a trainer. Learn tennis. Blend in. The message was clear, my individuality was inconvenient. Despite the hostility, I stayed. Because somewhere under the manipulation, I hoped the man I fell for still existed. I hoped the gestures would return, the admiration would reignite. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The cracks widened with each passive-aggressive comment, each eye roll. When I spoke about my work, each time he told me to let the men handle the money talk. The dinners turned into silent meals. The intimacy faded into obligation. Still, I smiled at cocktail hours, posted curated Instagram updates, and answered "everything's great" when old friends texted, and then came the control. Not overt. Subtle. Sophisticated. He began scrutinizing my purchases, questioning receipts, comparing my spending habits to his standards. Another pair of boots, he'd scoff. Meanwhile, he bought watches that cost more than my annual income. I started withdrawing, emotionally and socially. I visited my parents less. James said Indiana was provincial. I stopped calling friends. He found them embarrassing. I stopped creating just for fun. He thought it was juvenile. And the scariest part? I began believing him until one night, I stood in our sleek kitchen, staring at a credit card bill he had flagged as excessive. It was for a few brushes, sketch pads, and new software. The same man who had no problem spending $4,000 on a cigar case was dissecting my $200 art supply tab. Something snapped. That night, I opened a separate savings account. Just a few dollars at first. Untraceable. Private. My first act of rebellion wasn't loud. It was quiet, calculated, mine, because the woman sitting in divorce court that day? The one watching her husband chuckle smugly across the table? That woman had already built something powerful. Not out of spite, but survival. James didn't know it yet, but the version of Alexandra he thought he controlled had vanished. The one sitting before him was reborn, and she had a plan. When the world you live in makes you feel invisible, sometimes you have to disappear on purpose, so you can rebuild yourself without anyone trying to stop you. That's what I did. After opening the hidden savings account, I started consuming knowledge like oxygen. Podcasts about entrepreneurship played in my ears while I cooked dinner alone. I read books on business strategy with a highlighter in one hand and a calculator in the other. I watched YouTube tutorials on SEO and data analytics like they were primetime drama. James thought I was burning time on harmless hobbies. That's how he described my sudden interest in digital marketing when I volunteered to help a friend's startup revamp their brand. Just make sure your little side hustle doesn't interfere with dinner at the Crawfords, he'd said, scrolling through his phone without glancing up. He had no idea I was studying the algorithms behind targeted ad funnels. That I was drafting business plans and mapping out launch strategies on the back of grocery receipts while he watched golf. That I was saving every dollar from freelance projects into an entity he didn't know existed. My business began quietly. With a single web page. No fanfare, no announcement, no splashy Instagram post. Just a sleek layout under the name AG Digital, a nod to my initials but far enough removed from my full name that no one could trace it easily. I took on my first client while James was at a financial conference in Miami. A bakery owner in our neighborhood was losing traffic to chain competitors and needed help. I offered to design a month-long campaign at a price far below agency rates, just enough to build credibility. The results were instant. Engagement tripled. Her email list grew like wildfire. She started tagging me in posts, calling me her digital fairy godmother. That endorsement brought 2 more clients, and then 5, and then a dozen. I transformed our guest bedroom into a working studio. James never noticed because he never stepped foot inside. He believed I needed a quiet space for crafting, and was grateful I wasn't cluttering the main rooms with my projects. Every time I received payment, I split it, half into reinvestment, the rest into diversified investments, mutual funds, tech startups. I opened brokerage accounts and set goals. By the end of the first year, I had surpassed my corporate salary. While still working in the shadows of our home, James still referred to me as not career-driven at dinner parties. I nodded and smiled while inside I calculated quarterly growth reports. His detachment helped me stay unnoticed. He was always working late, entertaining clients, or attending networking retreats that looked more like beach vacations with female coworkers. I stopped asking questions. Let him underestimate me. His perception of control gave me freedom. I became a ghost in my own house, silent but active, invisible but calculating. I built systems, automated workflows, studied high-converting content. I subscribed to newsletters that decoded ad trends and taught myself how to read consumer heat maps. Like street signs. My eyes no longer glazed over when reading market reports, they lit up. But it wasn't just the business that changed. I began transforming myself. I got up earlier. I ate healthier. I dressed sharper. My voice got steadier. My spine straighter. People around us noticed. What's different about you? One of James' colleagues asked at a charity gala. James, without missing a beat, answered, she finally stopped worrying about work. I smiled politely and clinked glasses, all while mentally scripting tomorrow's proposal for a boutique hotel chain looking to rebrand. At night, while he slept, I whispered affirmations to myself in the walk-in closet I had soundproofed using old studio blankets. That closet, once a place of wardrobe excess, became my war room. Eventually, I couldn't hide the success. Clients wanted Zoom meetings. Team members needed onboarding. I invested in noise-canceling panels, shifted larger calls to coffee shops, and used burner email accounts. Still, I wasn't ready to reveal anything, not because I feared losing James, but because I feared he would try to take credit. Or worse, try to crush it. What he didn't realize was that my confidence didn't come from his validation anymore. It came from invoices paid, clients retained, campaigns that went viral. Point 1. Afternoon, he walked into the bedroom to find me finalizing a pitch deck. I quickly minimized the window. What are you working on? He asked lazily, unbuttoning his shirt. Just helping a friend prep for a branding meeting, I lied smoothly. He nodded, already disinterested. Don't stress yourself too much, babe. Not everyone's built for boardrooms. That night, I closed my laptop, stared at the ceiling, and promised myself one thing: he'd eat those words. My business grew, and so did I. I began outsourcing small tasks. First a VA in Florida, then a designer in Portland. I hired a part-time bookkeeper, and soon, a strategist for paid media. Every person on my team was someone James didn't know existed. And they were loyal to me. Point 1. Client, a jewelry designer, based in Seattle, ran a holiday campaign through my firm that quintupled her sales. When she was featured in Women in Business Weekly, she wanted to name-drop my agency. I declined. Anonymity was still part of the plan. The more I succeeded, the more his arrogance fueled me. Every time he belittled my career during brunch or rolled his eyes when I spoke, he unknowingly poured gasoline on the fire I was quietly tending. I wasn't bitter. I was focused. The day I passed $250,000 in annual revenue, I bought myself a single gift, a silver ring engraved with the word, quiet. Not as a reminder of submission, but as a tribute to the silence in which I built my empire. James noticed the ring once and scoffed. Minimalist. Not your usual style. I smiled. It's a symbol. He didn't ask what it meant. He never really listened. That was his mistake, because while he was too busy talking, I was building. It happened on a Thursday. James was in the shower, steam curling beneath the bathroom door, and I was gathering towels when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't have glanced twice, but the preview caught my eye before I could turn away. Miss you already. Last night was. The message disappeared as quickly as it came. But the sender's name, V, burned itself into my brain. I stood there, heart hammering, towel in hand, pretending everything wasn't suddenly unraveling. James emerged moments later, humming to himself, kissing me lightly on the cheek. I forced a smile. But inside, something fractured. That weekend, I said I had a brunch date with Sophia. Instead, I followed James. He drove downtown, just like always, but instead of heading to the office, he parked outside a sleek restaurant we rarely visited together. At 8:43 p.m., a silver Audi pulled in beside his BMW. The driver stepped out. Long dark hair cascading down a designer coat. Vanessa Pierce. His coworker. I stayed in my car. Watched them kiss in the parking lot like no one could see. Like I didn't exist. Like 8 years of marriage meant less than 1 month of new obsession. The betrayal wasn't cinematic. It was quiet. Precise. Like being cut with a blade too sharp to feel at first. I waited 30 minutes before stepping inside. There they were, corner booth, candlelight flickering, his hand on hers. Leaning in. Laughing. Completely unbothered. I didn't cause a scene. I walked up, smiled faintly, and said, so this is why Thursday nights suddenly became sacred. James' hand jerked back. Vanessa froze. Her wine glass trembled. He blinked, trying to summon charm. Alexandra, this isn't. Don't insult both of us by pretending, I said, calm as ice. Vanessa bolted, muttering something about the restroom. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. You've been so distant, he said, as if my emotional withdrawal had manifested this affair. We barely talk. You're always buried in whatever you're doing. You mean the projects you never ask about? I countered. You used to be exciting. Focused on us. Now it's just schedules, your hobbies, your laptop, my business. I corrected him sharply. Which pays real clients. Brings real results. Unlike this fantasy you're playing out in public. His eyes narrowed. You're overreacting. I left without another word. That night, I didn't cry. I logged into my business account. Transferred more savings. Backed up every document. Printed copies. Called my attorney the next morning. James came home past midnight, smelling like regret and scotch. He stumbled through a half-hearted apology, peppered with empty promises, therapy, travel, reconnecting. I nodded. Told him I needed space to process. He thought it was an invitation to redemption. He had no idea it was a countdown to extraction. Over the next few weeks, I became a master of duality. We went to dinners, smiled for photos, nodded at neighbors. But behind closed doors, I assembled files, contacted advisors, and mapped my exit like a military operation. Enter Teresa Washington, divorce attorney and war strategist. Referred by Natalie, she exuded authority from the moment we met. No nonsense. Razor-focused, her advice was clear: don't tip him off. Not yet, gather. Document. Then strike, she said, sliding a checklist across her polished desk. I followed every instruction. I learned James had more hidden accounts than he had excuses. Offshore funds. Secondary portfolios. Trusts designed to disappear behind family names. But what he didn't realize. I had every receipt, every password he once carelessly shared, every traceable thread. Still, I moved with precision. Backed up files to multiple encrypted drives. Stored copies in a safety deposit box at a bank James didn't know I used. Cleared digital footprints with forensic thoroughness. My double life expanded, business by day, liberation blueprint by night. Then, I made a mistake. One search. One browser session. One moment of exhaustion, and I forgot to switch to incognito mode. He saw it: divorce asset protection for women. The confrontation happened in our kitchen. He slammed his phone on the counter. So this is what you've been doing behind my back? I didn't flinch. Shouldn't that be my line? You're going to try to rob me? His face twisted in disbelief. I leaned in, voice low. I'm claiming what I've earned. Nothing more. He lost control. Shouted. Threatened lawsuits. Promised I'd walk away with nothing but a duffel bag. I didn't react. I had already walked through every scenario with Teresa. She had explained Illinois laws, marital property loopholes, and the dangers of reacting emotionally. I let him vent. Let him underestimate me one last time. That night, I moved all sensitive materials, contracts, tax records, NDAs, into protected storage. Any illusion of reconciliation was gone. Still, he didn't stop. The next betrayal arrived in the form of a gift box, hidden in his closet, tucked inside a boot. A Tiffany's bracelet. $15,000. Date stamped 2 months prior. Not addressed to me. Before I could catch my breath, I heard the front door open. James and a woman, they were laughing. I stayed hidden. Listened to footsteps grow louder. When they reached the bedroom, I stepped into the doorway. Vanessa froze. James blinked. You're home, he said, as though I owed him an apology for existing. I stared at them both. Your timing is impeccable. I just found your receipt. Vanessa retreated. James didn't bother with excuses. Let's not drag this out. I want a divorce. He outlined his proposal like a quarterly forecast. He keeps the condo, the investments, the cars. I get a generous check and the freedom to move on with dignity. You can start looking for a new place tonight, he said, with the arrogance of someone who believed he still held the keys to my future. I straightened my posture. Smiled. Actually, this is still my address. If anyone's leaving it's you too. His face twisted. Vanessa tugged at his sleeve. Let's go, James. He glared at me before leaving. You'll regret this. As the door clicked shut, I leaned back against it. And exhaled. I had never felt lighter. He thought I was just a designer from Winfield. He had no idea I was Alexander Grant, CEO, strategist, investor, and I wasn't finished yet. James underestimated me for the last time. Now it was my turn to unveil the truth. Not with shouting. Not with vengeance. With facts. With numbers. With proof. The day after I caught them in our bedroom, I changed every lock, then cataloged every item in our home. Photographed furniture. Scanned receipts. Sent everything to Teresa. While James expected me to curl up in devastation, I was documenting evidence and securing leverage. His legal team, led by an old money attorney named Lawrence Wilson, sent over an insult dressed in legalese, $75,000. 6 months of support. No claim to anything else. I almost laughed. After 8 years of marriage, including 5 where I contributed in silence, that was their offer. As if my value came with a price tag and an expiration date, Teresa read the document, rolled her eyes, and said, he thinks you're scared. Good. Let's keep it that way, for now. We invoked the formal discovery process, a legal mechanism forcing both parties to disclose all assets, accounts, holdings, and debts. James stalled. Delayed. Sent incomplete forms. Claimed accounts didn't exist. His team hoped I'd grow tired. Or broke, but I had something stronger than wealth, preparation. Every asset he forgot to mention, I had already documented. Every foreign account he assumed I didn't know about, I had receipts for. Every stock, bond, and trust, logged, tracked, and preserved. Still, Teresa played the long game. Let him think you're just reacting emotionally, she advised. We're going to control the facts. What James never realized was that my business, Alexandra Grant Digital Solutions, was structured strategically. I owned it outright. Started with my savings. Grew without his funding. And thanks to a clause buried in our prenup, which Teresa unearthed like gold, it qualified as separate property. That clause was James' own doing. Inserted years ago to Protect his potential ventures. The irony was exquisite. While his team built arguments around his reputation, I built a timeline of my business from seed to success, every contract, every invoice, every tax return, every satisfied client testimonial. Meanwhile, my company had taken off. After a viral campaign for a regional diner chain exploded on social media, new clients flooded in. I expanded my team to 5. Moved out of my home office. Signed a lease on a chic workspace with floor-to-ceiling windows. Built something that wasn't just profitable, but respected. James, still convinced I was scraping by, doubled down on damage control. He began spinning tales, telling mutual friends I had mental health issues, claiming I'd lost my grip. Even our doorman stopped making eye contact. I didn't chase their approval. I chased elevation. Sophia and Natalie never left my side. They were the reminders that I didn't need society's validation. I needed integrity. And I had it in spades. Then James made his next mistake. He filed a motion to freeze joint accounts, claiming I might try to drain resources. It backfired. Teresa presented our financial records, meticulously organized, to the court. She showed how James used marital funds to purchase gifts for Vanessa. How he financed personal vacations, hid capital gains, and siphoned assets into trusts. He was caught, and that was only the beginning. Teresa filed a motion to unseal tax returns, forcing his hand on hidden income. We subpoenaed brokerage statements. The court began piecing together a pattern of deception. Still, James believed he would win. He believed the courtroom was a formality, a place where money whispered and influence screamed, but he had no idea what was coming. On the morning of our final court date, I dressed deliberately. A navy suit. No flash. Just strength. My hair pinned back. Minimal makeup. A single necklace, a small pendant gifted by Natalie and Sophia, engraved with the word resilience. I walked into the courthouse alone. Teresa joined me minutes later. James was already inside, surrounded by legal aides. He looked confident, smug, untouchable. Vanessa was absent. Perhaps realizing she was no longer part of the performance, the judge, Margaret Thompson, presided with stern authority. Silver hair. Sharp eyes. Zero tolerance for theatrics. James' team spoke first. They painted him as the noble provider. Me as the fragile dreamer who let resentment fester. They downplayed my contributions. Elevated his earnings. Claimed our condo, vehicles, and investments were rightfully his. James testified. Spoke about sacrifice. About helping Alexandra chase creative endeavors. About how his support allowed me the comfort to pursue passions. I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. When it was Teresa's turn, she stood calmly and said, "We'd like to begin by correcting the record." She submitted documents, emails, bank statements, logs. She revealed every asset James failed to disclose. Offshore accounts. Undeclared dividends. Luxury items labeled as gifts to friends. The judge listened. Her expression turned colder with every page, and then Teresa dropped the final envelope on the bench. "My client's complete financial disclosure, Your Honor." Inside was the truth James had never imagined. The judge opened the file. "Read quietly." Then aloud, "Alexandra Grant Digital Solutions. Current valuation, $4.2 million. The silence in that courtroom could have shattered glass. James blinked rapidly, his posture straightening in disbelief. Investment holdings totaling $1.8 million. I didn't look at him. I stared straight ahead. One property, purchased outright in cash 3 months ago. Valued at $950,000. By then, he looked physically unwell. Judge Thompson closed the folder. "Mr. Shannon, do you wish to revise your previous statements about your wife's financial dependency?" He said nothing. Teresa stood again. "And one final clarification, Your Honor. According to Clause 23 of the prenuptial agreement, authored by Mr. Shannon's counsel, any business created during the marriage without financial contribution from the spouse remains sole property of the founder." The judge reviewed the clause. Her face remained neutral, but her tone shifted. "This language is binding and clear." James leaned forward, lips parted. The judge continued, "Given the discrepancies in Mr. Shannon's financial disclosures and Mrs. Shannon's demonstrated independence, this court awards all ownership of Alexandra Grant Digital Solutions and associated assets solely to the respondent." I could feel his glare without turning, and yet I felt nothing. No glee. No revenge, just peace. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, due to Mr. Shannon's failure to provide full disclosure and clear misuse of marital funds, the court finds it equitable that the remaining shared assets be divided in favor of Mrs. Shannon." The room didn't erupt. It deflated. James' counsel whispered furiously. He slumped in his chair. When court adjourned, James brushed past his team and approached me. "You set me up," he whispered, eyes narrowed. I met his gaze. "Steady. Cool. Certain. I built something. You just never cared to see it. Teresa stepped in. That's enough. As we walked out, sunlight spilled over the courthouse steps. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. I wasn't the girl he met at the fundraiser. I wasn't the woman he tried to mold. I was the storm he never saw coming, and I had just stepped into the calm after it. Leaving the courthouse wasn't. The end.it was the doorway to everything I had fought for: security, identity, and the space to finally live without being shadowed by someone else's ego. Within a week, I packed what remained of my belongings into crisp white boxes. I didn't take much, just the pieces that reflected me. Not the designer handbags he gifted for show, or the sculptures he chose to impress guests. I took the books I loved. The framed design mock-ups from my early campaigns. The battered sketchbook that started everything, and I left behind the woman he had tried to shape. The penthouse I moved into wasn't the flashiest on the market. It wasn't dripping with marble or chandelier drenched like his. But it had something more valuable: warmth. Every corner bore my imprint. A reading nook, flooded with sunlight. An office lined with corkboards and blueprints. A dining table where friends could laugh without judgment. I didn't have to ask permission to paint the walls. I didn't have to justify furniture that served comfort over prestige. The space breathed with possibility. The first night alone in that new home, I stood barefoot on the balcony, sipping tea and watching the lake shimmer like a mirror. The silence didn't feel empty, it felt earned. The next morning, I went public. After years of working in secret, I posted the official launch of Alexandra Grant Digital Solutions across every major platform. The rebranding came with new logos, testimonials, and a founder's letter that told the truth, not about my marriage, but about my mission. We exist to elevate overlooked voices and build strategies that reflect authenticity, not just aesthetics. The response was immediate. Former clients reshared their success stories. Business publications reached out for interviews. Invitations to speak at marketing panels and entrepreneurship events rolled in like waves. I didn't chase the spotlight, it arrived on its own. I hired 2 full-time project managers within weeks. Then a creative director, a finance consultant, a legal advisor. I structured contracts, developed HR policies, implemented performance tracking systems, all processes James never believed I could understand. Within 6 months, AG Digital tripled its revenue. We opened a second office in Austin and signed deals with 2 major retail chains. For the first time, I wasn't hiding invoices in the grocery budget or muting Zoom calls. I was operating fully, openly, boldly. Sophia, who had been my first client, joined as Chief Operating Officer. Her blend of kindness and competence balanced my strategic mind. She handled onboarding, culture building, and team wellness while I focused on innovation and scale. Natalie remained my compass. We had dinner twice a month, talked strategy weekly, and she continued to coach me through investment decisions. Under her guidance, I backed several promising startups, one of which was acquired within 9 months, returning a significant yield. And then came the speaking circuit. Standing on stages across the country, I told my story. Not to bash James or air dirty laundry, but to show what women can accomplish when they stop waiting for permission. I spoke at women's leadership forums, at tech accelerators, at universities where young designers asked how to grow without giving up their voice. One event in San Diego changed everything. After my keynote, a woman approached in tears. She was in a controlling marriage, unsure if she had anything to offer the world. "You reminded me I don't have to stay small just because he can't see me," she whispered. That moment solidified the next chapter. I created the Independent Futures Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to financial literacy and business mentorship for women exiting high-control environments. We provided seed grants, legal assistance, and free virtual workshops. The mission was simple: teach women how to reclaim their autonomy through ownership of resources, of careers, of futures. In less than a year, the foundation helped launch 47 small businesses. One of those founders went viral on TikTok and hired her first employee within 2 months. Another published a cookbook that hit the local bestsellers list. Their wins were my victories too. Therapy became a non-negotiable. I worked weekly with Dr. Harper, a trauma-informed psychologist who helped me rebuild internally. She didn't rush the process or minimize the grief. "You're not healing from a breakup," she reminded me once. "You're recovering from years of erasure." She was right. There were nights I still woke up furious over things I tolerated, conversations I replayed, gaslighting I normalized, but healing came in waves, unexpected and soft, like the day I wore a hoodie and jeans to the grocery store and felt no shame about not looking chic enough. Like when I visited my parents for Thanksgiving and laughed so hard at my nephew's dance moves that my cheeks hurt, like the time I caught my reflection in a mirror and thought, "She looks free. Not flawless. Not perfect. But real." I even began dating again, slowly, cautiously. With no need to impress, no urge to edit myself. I met a writer named Leo at a business mixer. He had kind eyes and listened more than he spoke. We went for walks. Talked books. Shared silence comfortably when I told him about AG Digital. He didn't flinch. That's amazing, he said. You built all of that? I did. On your own? Yes. He smiled. Even better. We're not rushing anything. I don't feel the need to define us. But for the first time, I'm being loved without being managed, and that feels revolutionary. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I was invited to the same charity gala where I met James. I attended, not out of spite, but closure. Natalie came with me. We arrived in matching navy dresses. And matching levels of unbothered. James was there. He approached cautiously, with a date who looked as polished and anxious as I once did. You look, well, he said. I am. I heard about your company. I'm sure you have. He paused. I underestimated you. I met his gaze. Not with anger, but clarity. I know. He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. And I didn't wait. I turned, rejoined my table, and raised a glass to the life I had chosen, not the one I was given. Some people fear being underestimated. I learned to use it. For years, James looked at me and saw someone he could control, someone who would smile for the camera, sit quietly during investor dinners, and agree to every plan he made without question. He never imagined that behind my polite silence was a mind cataloging every move, absorbing every insult, storing every discarded moment like ammunition. Let him think I was weak. It gave me the space to become unstoppable. That's the irony of being overlooked. When no one's watching, you're free to create something that no one can destroy. While he was performing for clients, I was building a legacy. While he was dismissing my potential, I was investing in it. Now, with distance, I can say this without bitterness. James was my greatest catalyst. He didn't break me. He revealed me. For a long time after the divorce, I didn't tell people the whole story. I didn't need to. My success wasn't born from revenge, it was born from reclaiming my autonomy. But behind every polished LinkedIn post, every press feature, every keynote speech, there was a woman who remembered what it felt like to sit at a dinner table and be laughed at for bringing homemade bread to a family brunch. Who remembered being told her dreams were cute, her ambitions unsustainable, her emotions unprofessional. I remember, and because I do, I now speak with conviction when I tell other women, you are not too sensitive. You are not too much. You are not asking for too much. You are not crazy, you are simply in a space that cannot hold your expansion. I wasn't born bold. I was shaped by circumstances that forced me to grow armor. But what I've learned is that real strength isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet consistency. It's showing up even when no one is cheering. It's doing the work in the shadows so that when the light finally finds you, you're already prepared. I no longer ask for permission to take up space. I no longer apologize for being driven, opinionated, or passionate. I no longer shrink so someone else can feel tall beside me. The most profound part of this journey hasn't been the money or the accolades. It's been the rediscovery of self. The return to that young woman from Winfield who dreamed big, scribbled ideas on napkins, and believed that her thoughts mattered. I didn't lose her. I buried her beneath layers of performance and perfection. And then I dug her out with grace and grit. Therapy taught me something I didn't expect, that many successful women carry the shame of having once tolerated less than they deserved. We're embarrassed by our past compliance. But healing requires compassion, even for the versions of ourselves who stayed too long, spoke too softly, or believed too little. To anyone reading or watching this who feels stuck, small, silenced, I see you, and I want you to know this, you are allowed to change the story. Start with one small act. Open a savings account. Update that resume. Take that course. Have that hard conversation. Stand taller at the dinner table. Say no. Say yes to yourself, because that's where it begins, not in the courtroom, not in the spotlight, not in revenge, but in the decision to choose yourself quietly. And then Daily.my business now operates globally. We've launched campaigns on 3 continents. I speak at international conferences. My foundation has secured partnerships with major financial institutions to offer free programs for underserved communities, but I still hold on to that first dollar earned from my bakery client, the one who trusted me when I had no clout, no office, just conviction and a Canva login. That crumpled bill is framed above my desk, because that was the moment I knew I didn't need anyone's approval to begin. Just my own. James' name rarely comes up anymore. When it does, it's in past tense. As a footnote. A cautionary tale. People sometimes ask if I've forgiven him. I tell them, I've outgrown him. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's releasing. The hold someone has on your peace. I don't carry rage. I carry clarity, and in that clarity, I make better choices now. I trust slower. I love with boundaries. I build with intention. My company only works with clients whose missions align with impact. My team knows that emotional health is as important as deadlines. We don't chase clout. We build legacy, and when I mentor young women through my foundation, I tell them this: don't build your empire to prove a point. Build it so you never have to beg again. Build it so you can walk away, quietly, if needed, and never look back. That's what I did, and I'm never going back. 1 year to the day after our divorce was finalized, I received an invitation that arrived in gold foil, just like the ones James used to prefer. It was for a charity gala benefiting children's literacy. The same one where we had first met. The irony was unmissable. I hesitated, not because I feared seeing him, but because I wasn't sure if returning to that place, those chandeliers, those curated smiles, those hushed whispers, served the woman I'd become. But Natalie, ever perceptive, read my silence during lunch and said, "You're not going to that gala to prove anything. You're going because you already have." So I went, not in borrowed elegance, not in high heels chosen to impress. I wore a midnight blue gown of my own design, with pockets deep enough to hold my business cards and confidence. My hair was slicked into a clean bun. No diamonds. Just a silver bracelet, one I bought for myself when we landed our first 7-figure client. I arrived alone, but not unarmed. Strength isn't in numbers. It's in presence. And I carried mine like armor. The venue hadn't changed. Same valet. Same lobby perfumed with overcompensation. Same coatroom that once whispered judgments behind designer clutches, but I had changed. I was no longer the woman trying to fit in. I was the one others now tried to emulate. I mingled gracefully, exchanging business cards, shaking hands with city leaders who had once overlooked me at events. The evening glided forward, speeches, wine, applause. Then, across the ballroom, I saw him, James, hair slightly thinner, posture slightly dimmer. Eyes that darted before settling on me, and beside him? Not Vanessa. Not someone I recognized. A woman dressed like I used to, elegant, quiet, slightly nervous, holding her purse with both hands. When he approached, he came alone. "Alexandra," he said, with a smile that tried to remember its charm. I turned to face him. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel heat, or dread, or longing. I felt light. "You look well," I offered. "Yes, I do." His smile faltered. "I've seen your name everywhere. The business, the foundation. It's impressive." I didn't nod. Didn't thank him. I waited. He started again. "I think I owe you an apology." That caught my attention. I was so focused on molding the perfect partner, he said, eyes glancing down, that I didn't bother to see the incredible person right in front of me. Silence stretched between us like a glass bridge, fragile, reflective, easily shattered. I thought control was security. I thought wealth was value. But you proved me wrong. I studied him, not as a lover, not as a threat, but as a human. He looked like a man still spinning, still unsure if he was watching a mistake or a missed opportunity. "I'm not angry anymore, James," I said quietly. "You didn't break me. You redirected me." He blinked. "Do you ever think? If we'd done things differently?" "No," I said simply. "Because if I'd stayed, I wouldn't have become who I am." He looked down, nodded, then tried one last time. "You've built something amazing." "We could've," I held up my hand. Not in dismissal. In closure. "I'm not a chapter you reopen when you realize the plot has gone stale." He exhaled. Slowly. "I deserve that." "No," I replied, voice calm. "You deserve to see it. Up close." He returned to his date. I returned to my table. Natalie raised her glass without needing to ask. "To the quiet revolution," she said, "to the soft power of knowing who you are," I replied. That night, I went home not to prove anything, but to rest peacefully. In a home I built. A bed I chose. A life I owned. In the months that followed, the foundation expanded. We launched a mobile app teaching budgeting, contract negotiation, and digital marketing basics to survivors of economic abuse. I started a podcast featuring stories of women who left silence and found success. Our listenership exploded. Sponsors came knocking. Meanwhile, AG Digital crossed a milestone, over 100 clients served. Our team expanded to 15 employees, including remote staff in 6 cities. We weren't just profitable, we were respected, but more than that, I had reclaimed something deeper. I no longer moved through life with apology. I spoke clearly, trusted my instincts, and declined anything that required me to minimize myself. My family, once distant due to James' quiet alienation, now visited frequently. My niece drew me as Superwoman Business Lady for her school project. My mother, teary-eyed during brunch, said, "You came back to us stronger than we ever imagined." I didn't just return. I rose, and I knew the journey wasn't finished. There were more women to empower, more businesses to guide, more rooms to walk into without flinching, More stories to tell, not just mine, but those still silenced by shame or fear or circumstance, because freedom isn't a single courtroom victory. It's a decision made daily. To choose peace over control. Purpose over performance. Power over permission. That's the truth James never grasped. He thought power was inherited. Bestowed. Displayed. I learned that real power is built. Quietly. Persistently. Authentically, and once you find it, no one can take it from you again. At some point, success stops being about proving people wrong. It becomes about building something that outlives you. After years of working in the shadows, surviving in silence, and winning in private, I found myself standing on a stage in front of thousands, no script, no teleprompter, just a single spotlight and a microphone. The Women in Leadership Summit had invited me as their keynote speaker. The theme? Reclamation. I stood there, not as James Shannon's ex-wife. Not as a girl from Indiana who had once questioned her worth. But as the architect of a company, a foundation, and a life that didn't just exist in contrast to a man's abandonment, but in alignment with my own restoration. I began, not with statistics or accolades, but with a question: how many of you have been told that ambition makes you difficult? 100 hands rose. How many of you have made yourselves smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of acceptable? More hands. How many of you were told that your goals were unrealistic right before you achieved them? Laughter. Applause. Recognition. I told my story, not as a revenge tale, but a resurrection. How silence became strategy. How betrayal became blueprint. How being dismissed became the exact leverage I needed to climb, and when I walked off stage, I didn't bask in applause. I met with attendees, face to face, woman to woman. One told me she left her emotionally manipulative fiancé last week after following my podcast. Another had used the foundation's budgeting course to escape a financial trap set by her spouse. A third had started her own consultancy, landing her first 5-figure contract, and cried as she said thank you. Each story reminded me, I wasn't just building income. I was igniting transformation, and I was just getting started. The Independent Futures Foundation expanded faster than I ever imagined. What began as a one-room office and a few online courses turned into a multi-state initiative. We launched chapters in Atlanta, Denver, and Portland. We partnered with legal clinics to offer pro bono contract reviews for women entering business. We created mentorship circles, pairing women with those who had survived similar battles. I personally mentored 5 women every quarter. Not for optics. For impact. One of them, Raquel, had 3 kids and a dream of starting a meal prep business. She had $400, no formal education, and a fire in her voice I recognized. We helped her with licensing, branding, marketing. 3 months later, she secured a recurring deal with a local gym. 6 months later, she hired 2 employees. A year later, she sent me a note. I can finally breathe. That's legacy. It's not about being on magazine covers or trending on Twitter. It's about teaching women how to open bank accounts in their own names without fear. How to say no without guilt. How to walk away from tables where they were only ever offered crumbs. I began writing a book. Not a memoir. A manual. Title: The Quiet Exit, Building Power in Places That Want You Silent. It included checklists, templates, scripts for difficult conversations. Not just how I left, but how others could. The publishing house wanted drama. I gave them strategy. Give us the juicy divorce details, one editor said. No, I replied. Give them the tools I wish I had when I was 29. My team surprised me that year with an anniversary party. 5 years since AG Digital officially launched. They filled the office with lavender balloons, photos of our biggest campaigns, and handwritten notes about what working here meant to them. One employee wrote, "You didn't just give me a job. You gave me my voice back." I stepped outside after the celebration, heart pounding not from anxiety, but I had built a workplace I would have needed during those years in hiding. One where no one was mocked for emotion. Where feedback was firm but respectful. Where women weren't afraid to lead, and men didn't feel the need to dominate. I even created a parental leave policy that included therapy stipends, because healing should be part of any family plan. Every now and then, I'd still get messages from James' old circle. An ex-friend sending a "Hey, saw your TED Talk" text. An acquaintance asking for career advice. Even a former Shannon cousin reaching out for a job at my firm. I never responded with spite. I responded with boundaries. You can reclaim yourself without returning to the places that once erased you, because evolution doesn't require applause from your past. It only requires devotion to your future. I began dreaming bigger. Acquisition offers came in, but I declined. This company wasn't for sale. It wasn't a product to flip, it was a home for others like me. Women who had talent but no runway. Vision but no backing. Drive but no permission. We didn't just design marketing plans. We rewrote belief systems. Each Quarter, I set aside 10% of company profit to fund microgrants for overlooked entrepreneurs. We called it the First Step Fund. We didn't ask for pitch decks or glossy branding. Just intention, grit, a willingness to learn, and that fund gave birth to bookstores, community cafes, clothing lines, coding boot camps, and bilingual tutoring programs. It spread like fire in dry brush, quietly, relentlessly, unstoppably. I realized one night, sitting alone in my office long after everyone left, that I was no longer just a woman who escaped. I was a woman who replaced what had been broken with something far more beautiful. Not every day is triumphant, there are still moments where I flinch at certain phrases. Still mornings where I wake from dreams of being silenced again. Still interviews where I'm asked what I learned from James, as though my worth must always be filtered through a man's impact, but I answer truthfully. He taught me how not to lead, how not to love, how not to limit others just because I'm afraid of their light, and maybe that's worth something too. There's a moment when your story stops being just yours, when it becomes a ripple that breaks across the surface of someone else's silence. When a whisper from your past grows loud enough to start an avalanche of change. That moment came when my TED Talk crossed 5 million views. I didn't expect it. I had shared honestly, but quietly, just a small red dot on a big stage, speaking about the hidden currency of emotional control. About how a woman doesn't have to be bruised to be broken. About how psychological manipulation is often dressed in tailored suits and anniversary rings. It was never meant to go viral, but it did. Emails flooded in. Thousands. Women from 30 countries. Men, too. Teachers. Scientists. Nurses. Executives. People who had felt unseen in the exact same way. People who didn't even know what to name their pain until I did. One line from the talk was quoted most often. He called it love. But it was silence with a bow on top. I started being invited to speak globally, panels in Geneva about economic autonomy, workshops in South Africa on digital entrepreneurship, interviews with Australian outlets on rebuilding after financial control. I was no longer the woman rebuilding in the shadows. I was now the mapmaker, and that responsibility became sacred. Back home, AG Digital continued to thrive. We expanded to London, then Toronto. My foundation partnered with international NGOs to offer multilingual resources for women escaping control in communities that lacked formal support. One pilot program in Brazil taught women how to monetize handmade crafts through social media. The next quarter, those women earned 4 times their previous household income. One used the money to send her daughter to school. Another bought land. Every update felt like a heartbeat from the world I'd once only dreamed of impacting. But amid all the noise, awards, speaking engagements, viral quotes, I kept my rituals: tea before bed, monthly dinner with Sophia and Natalie, journaling every Sunday evening, because staying grounded wasn't optional. It was vital. The more visible I became, the more the world tried to define me by one thing: empowered ex-wife, feminist business mogul, divorce hero. They weren't wrong, but they weren't the full story, because I hadn't built this life because of James. I had built it in spite of what being with him required me to suppress. He wasn't my origin story. He was the obstacle I rerouted around, and that difference mattered deeply to me. One journalist pressed during a podcast interview, "What would you say to him now?" I paused, then said, "Nothing." "Nothing," she echoed. I said everything I needed to by surviving, and then thriving, and then lifting others. There was no triumph in watching James fail, but there was peace in watching myself rise without needing him to fall further. I heard through a mutual contact that Vanessa had moved out 6 months after the court case. That his reputation in certain circles had dimmed. That investors hesitated when his name appeared on pitch decks, but I didn't dig. I didn't care, because what mattered wasn't where he ended up. It was where I refused to stay, and now I stood in places he would never reach. One of those places was a roundtable of global investors in Zurich. I was the only woman, the only self-made entrepreneur at the table. The only one who had turned adversity into a replicable model of empowerment. They asked about scalability, ROI, long-term exit strategy. I answered each question thoroughly. Then one executive leaned forward and asked, "Where did this begin for you?" I smiled. "In a guest bedroom converted into a secret office," I said, "while someone else thought I was wasting time on Pinterest." He chuckled, then leaned back. "I bet he regrets that now." I didn't respond, because the point wasn't whether he regretted it. The point was that I had nothing left to prove to him, or anyone like him. That's what real peace feels like. It's not loud. It's not vindictive. It's not even proud. It's quiet, steady, unshakable, like standing on a cliff edge and realizing you've grown wings. That year, AG Digital launched its first ever scholarship program for underrepresented women in tech and media. We selected 10 recipients. All expenses covered. Mentorship included. Their stories made me cry. One had been sleeping in her car while studying graphic design. Another had fled an arranged marriage at 19. A third was raising 2 kids alone while working 2 jobs. We didn't give them charity. We gave them tools, because survival is heroic, but thriving is revolutionary, and that's what I want written on my legacy. Not that I made millions. Not that I escaped a bad marriage. But that I turned every wound into an open door for someone else. So if you're hearing this, if you're still in the place where your worth is questioned, your voice dismissed, your dreams deferred, let me say this: you don't need anyone's permission to begin. You don't need applause to continue. And you certainly don't need validation from the ones who failed to recognize your brilliance in the first place. Sometimes, the greatest act of defiance isn't walking out in flames. It's walking away silently, and building something louder than fire ever could be. There was no parade. No confetti. No final applause. Just a quiet morning. Sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room, warming the wood floors I had chosen myself. A soft instrumental playlist played in the background, nothing dramatic, just familiar notes that wrapped around me like memory. I poured coffee into my favorite ceramic mug, the one with the chipped rim and hand-painted flowers. It had survived 4 moves, 1 marriage, and the rise of an empire. I stood barefoot, sipping slowly, and smiled, not because of a headline. Not because of a record-breaking quarter, but because the silence no longer scared me. It no longer meant isolation or neglect. It no longer whispered that I was invisible. It meant calm. It meant I was home, not just in this space, but in this skin. After years of contorting myself to fit the silhouette someone else wanted, I had grown into a shape that was undeniably mine. Untrimmed. Unsoftened. Unapologetic, and in that stillness, I found the one thing that had always eluded me: peace without conditions. No performance. No proving. No pretending, just presence. The final phase of my healing wasn't about speaking louder. It was about needing fewer words. My team now ran with precision. I no longer had to approve every design, every pitch. I had taught them how to think like founders. And they honored that trust daily. I still checked in. Still offered vision. Still led, but not from panic. From abundance. AG Digital entered its 6th year with operations in 5 countries. Our clients spanned industries: tech, fashion, healthcare, nonprofits. We had built a reputation not for flash, but for integrity. The foundation crossed a milestone: over 1,000 women supported, 350 businesses launched, and countless others equipped with skills no one could ever confiscate. And through it all, I stayed grounded. I still made time to visit my parents twice a month. I still walked barefoot in my apartment on Sundays. I still journaled, still kept every business card from my first year in a shoebox under my desk, because while evolution requires movement, wisdom demands stillness. I no longer needed to react to everything. I responded, with choice, not urgency. Leo, the writer I had started seeing, remained present, but never overwhelming. He didn't try to shape me. He didn't need to. We talked about books and loss and architecture and forgiveness. We went dancing in socks across my living room. We spent rainy afternoons reading in silence. There was no performance. Only partnership, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't confusing chemistry with chaos. I was simply loved. One evening, we sat on the rooftop of my building watching the city flicker. I told him I had no desire to remarry, and he nodded without flinching. I didn't fall in love with a title, he said. I fell for a force. He meant it. And I believed him, but whether he stayed or not was never the question. Because now, I no longer built my world around other people's presence. I was the constant. Everything else was a choice, not a requirement. That was the gift James never gave me, and the one I gave myself. I began mentoring not just entrepreneurs, but young girls in schools. We started a curriculum called Own Your Name, teaching teenagers how to identify manipulation, speak with clarity, and navigate emotional power dynamics in friendships and dating. Because it starts early, the world doesn't wait until adulthood to start minimizing women. It begins in middle school, when they're told they're too loud, too intense, too confident. When their curiosity is labeled as arrogance. Their ambition is vanity. I didn't want the next generation to unlearn those lessons at 34. I wanted them to skip the erasure entirely. So I told them everything I wished someone had told me: you are allowed to outgrow people. You don't owe loyalty to someone who makes you feel small. Your boundaries aren't negotiable. And silence doesn't always mean safety. Some days, I still revisit old memories. Not out of grief, but gratitude, because every moment I once labeled as humiliation, betrayal, or loss became the mortar in my foundation. Without them, I wouldn't be this, and this version of me. She's not waiting anymore. Not hiding. Not hoping for approval. She's living fully, freely, fiercely, not because someone handed her a crown, but because she forged one in the fire, and placed it on her own head, quietly, and without permission. There's a unique loneliness that comes with growth, not because you're isolated, but because you start to see how few people truly understand what it costs to rebuild yourself from rubble, without applause, without a blueprint, and without anyone clapping from the sidelines. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was ascending, but ascent can be quiet. And it can be heavy, because once you reach a certain level of self-awareness, you no longer react to disrespect. You detach. You no longer chase recognition. You create. You no longer shrink for comfort. You expand, even if it means walking away from the rooms you once begged to be noticed in. That was my new rhythm. My mornings began with stillness, no alarms, no racing thoughts, just breath. I didn't rush into emails. I prioritized clarity. Before movement. I journaled not to report, but to process. I wrote about pressure, how leadership didn't always look like celebration. How even in freedom, there's responsibility. I now had a team of 20 people depending on me to show up. And more importantly, to model how to show up for themselves. No longer was I designing alone in a back bedroom, now I was shaping culture, inside my company and outside of it. We started offering quarterly retreats, not to grind harder, but to reflect smarter. We included mental health days as a non-negotiable part of employment. We set a precedent: no one burns out on my watch, because I had once burned quietly for years, pretending I wasn't exhausted, drained, unseen. I wouldn't let my legacy become someone else's cautionary tale. Outside of work, my influence continued to grow. A university awarded me an honorary doctorate in entrepreneurship. Forbes invited me to join their leadership council. Documentary filmmakers reached out, asking to chronicle my rise. I declined. I wasn't a spectacle. I was a standard. I didn't want to be sensationalized. I wanted to be studied, replicated, scaled. I created a blueprint series, digital modules for women building businesses while navigating power imbalances. Thousands enrolled. The reviews flooded in. I finally feel like I'm building something I can own. This gave me language for what I've been surviving. You helped me see I'm not the only one. That last line stuck with me, because isolation is what abusers count on. They expect silence. They feed off invisibility, but I had become visible, loud in my resolve, even when my voice was soft, and that visibility became armor for others. One evening, during a mentorship call, a young woman asked, "How do you keep going when you're scared?" I paused, then said, "You stop waiting to not be afraid. You move anyway. Not recklessly, but with rooted intention. Fear doesn't mean stop. It means pay attention." That call ended, but her question lingered, because truthfully, I still had fear, not of James. Not of failing. But of forgetting how far I'd come. That's the quiet danger of success. It tempts you to look forward so hard that you forget the power of looking back. So I installed a wall in my office. On it, I pinned every business card, thank you note, and email from the first year I launched. Next to them, photos from community events, foundation milestones, student graduation certificates, client transformations. That wall wasn't decor. It was grounding, because we don't rise by forgetting. We rise by remembering. Freedom doesn't roar. It doesn't burst into rooms demanding applause. It doesn't require spotlight, audience, or permission. It sounds like your own heartbeat. At peace. It sounds like closing a door without flinching, answering a phone without dread, buying something without guilt, saying no and meaning it, saying yes and not apologizing. That is what my life sounds like now. Peace isn't the absence of difficulty. It's the absence of self-betrayal, and I stopped betraying myself the day I said, enough shrinking, enough waiting, enough hoping someone else would see what I already knew deep inside. I was never the supporting character in James' story. I was the author the entire time. He just didn't read the fine print. Now, I mentor without bitterness, led without ego, build without needing to burn, and I know this journey isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman watching this who's ever been told to stay quiet, be grateful, tone it down, or not make waves. Let me be clear: make waves, make noise, make exits, make empires. You are not here to be small, you are not too much, you are exactly enough, for every room, every table, every stage, and when those spaces don't hold you, create your own and build without apology, rest without guilt, love without compromise. And if anyone ever tells you you're being unrealistic, smile and keep building, because the only thing more powerful than being underestimated is what happens when they realize they should have paid attention. Thank you for hearing my story. Now go write yours, with bold strokes, fierce heart, and the unshakable belief that you never needed to be saved, you only needed to be seen, and now, you are.